I've got bad news for you. If you clicked on this video hoping to hear some cookie cutter draft strategy like double hero RB, and yes, we did a video on that, zero RB, anchor wide receiver, or whatever the new fantasy football draft craze is this year, you're going to be very disappointed. But don't worry, because that disappointment is about to turn into pure elation, because in this video, I'm going to give you the exact blueprint to dominate your fantasy draft. And yes, I strongly emphasize the words your fantasy draft, because like many things in life, fantasy football drafts are not one size fits all. League sizes, scoring settings, roster requirements, it's all going to affect how you draft a lot. So no matter your league size or roster makeup, I've got you covered. I'm going to go over pretty much every possible league type and tell you exactly how you should draft. I've even made it easy for you with timestamps down below to every possible league, so you can just skip ahead to your exact league settings. Let's get you ready to actually dominate your fantasy draft in 2025, not with some cookie cutter strategy, but with real actionable strategy that works. Now, real quick, before I jump into each league, I do want to say I'm coming from the mindset of a PPR league, either full PPR or half PPR. This is what most people play in these days. If you do somehow still play in a non-PPR league, don't worry, I got you covered. At the end of the video, I will talk about the differences between non-PPR and PPR, but for right now, I'm assuming some sort of PPR. Let's do a quick note on kickers and defenses. Always take your kickers and defenses last. I'll say one strategy for defense is to look at the week 1 matchups. Find a defense that has a great matchup, and even better if you can find a defense that has great matchups, week 2, week 3 as well. You can just draft a defense and hold them for a few weeks. But please, don't go drafting whoever the elite defense was last year, this year, because it's very rare that they repeat as the elite defense. Same with kickers. I don't have any strategy for you on kickers. All I'll say to you is good luck. All right, let's jump into it, and let's start with, if you're in a league that has 12 or fewer teams and you start 7 or less players, I'm not counting kicker and defense, this is for you. So this will be a league that's 12 or fewer teams starting 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex. This is easily the most common fantasy league that is out there. And look, when you look at a league like this, at worst, your flex player is going to be like a top 80 pick. So the urgency to win the flex, not as high. Also, in this type of a format, I've learned over the years from either playing these like in work leagues or my home leagues or helping my wife in her work leagues, it's more important to have those elite players than it is to have that shiny, pretty bench. So we want to focus more on the starting lineup, and I would be more open to reaching on an elite QB here, because having that elite QB in these shallow leagues is a massive advantage. Also, in these leagues, studs are everything, especially at QB, running back, and wide receiver. You better have at least one stud at every position, if not multiple studs at least one position here, especially if you're in like a 10-team or an 8-team league. You don't want just good players. We want studs, which again is why bench not quite as important. There's going to be plenty of guys on the waiver wire that really shouldn't even be on the waiver wire in these leagues that you can pick up throughout the season. So we're going to hammer starting lineup. We're going to try to get an elite QB, and we're going to try to rack up as many studs as we can. So let's break down exactly how I would draft in this format. Now, to be quite honest, this draft is really quite simple. I mean, I'm not trying to be insulting or condescending. It just really is. I mean, when we're talking about the early rounds 1 through 4, you can draft any way. I mean, I at least want 1 stud running back and 1 stud wide receiver. And like I said, I would like to reach a little bit on an elite QB. I don't want to take one in the 1st or 2nd round, but I'll happily grab one in the 3rd round or even the 4th round if they're there. But really, other than that, you can do anything here. Just make sure you don't ignore like one position completely in this format. Like, this is not the format you want to do 0 RB, and I don't think this is the format you want to go RB, 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 because again, you're not going to have a stud wide receiver. We need studs, so just draft the best studs available and try to get that early elite QB. Then in rounds 5 through 7, again, I am focusing on my starting lineup. Bench it's important, but you're going to have a good bench in this format, and there's going to be plenty of good players on the waiver wire. So keep building out that starting lineup based on how you went in the first 4 rounds. Grab a good tight end here. Don't reach, crazy on it, but grab a good tight end that you can just set and forget, and you should be totally fine in this format. Again, it's kind of a simple strategy here if you're in this format, but I've learned over the years sometimes I try to get too cute, like I'm stocking up on wide receivers and ignoring running backs or whatever, and it's like, nah, just take really good players at every position and you'll be fine. Now, what about if you're in a 14-team league that only starts 7? This is a little bit deeper than the other league. We're still talking about 1 QB, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex. But now we're talking about your flex player closer to pick 100, so you got to have a little bit more urgency on the flex. And again, while this league isn't super deep, waivers are going to be a little thin here, so we do want to put a little bit more of an emphasis on the bench. So while I still do think an elite quarterback is worth it, here I'm only going to draft one if the value is there. I'm not going to reach for one like in the other format where I feel like it's kind of a must. I'm going to only take the value here if an elite quarterback falls to me. Otherwise, I'm fine just waiting and get those guys later in the draft like the Bo Nix's, Brock Purdy's, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott's, guys in that range. Now, it is still a shallow starting lineup here, so I still want to make sure I have studs at running back and wide receiver, which is why I'm not going to necessarily reach on a quarterback, because ideally I would like to have at least 2 studs at running back or wide receiver and 1 stud at the other position. So now how do I attack this draft? Well, again, in the early rounds, I'd said it, I want at least 2 studs at running back or wide receiver and 1 stud at the other. If one of those elite quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, falls to me in the 4th round, I'll take them, but I'm not going to reach on them in the 3rd round. In rounds 5 through 10, I'm just purely going best player available because, again, we do need a good bench here because waivers are going to be a bit thin. And again, I'm going to target those QBs in that kind of like 8-9 round range. The Bo Nix's, Brock Purdy's, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott's. Tight end, if a good tight end falls to me, sure, but I'm not going to force a tight end here. And I'm talking about the guys like Evan Ingram, David Njoku, guys in that kind of range where, hey, if they're there and they're available, I'll take them, but I'm not going to reach for them. Then, of course, to finish the draft, you're just going to load up on your bench, best player available, get that bench as stacked as you can for those bye weeks and for those injuries. Now, what if you're in a league with 10 or fewer teams, but you start 8 players? This would be a league where you start 1 QB, 2 running back, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, or 1 QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 2 flexes. And that's going to be a big difference here, and I'm going to talk about the difference a little bit. But again, this is a somewhat shallow league here. We're talking flex is going to be a top 80 player, so you don't have that crazy urgency to win the flex. But because we do have a little bit more starting positions, QB and tight end do get devalued a little bit in this format. So once again, I'm not going to reach for an elite QB, and I'm certainly not going to reach for a tight end. But if there's a QB value on one of those elite QBs, I'll take it. And while bench is getting a little more important, the waiver should still be pretty good here. So I still do want to focus a bit more on my starting lineup. I'm not as worried about my bench in these leagues. And then once again, it's shallow, so you better have studs, especially at running back and wide receiver. All right, so let's look at this draft. How do we attack it? Well, in rounds 1 through 4, of course, we want to attack those stud running backs and wide receivers. If one of those elite QBs falls to me in round 4, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, I'll draft them, but I'm not going to reach on them in round 3. Now, I do want to say, if you're in the 3 wide receiver league, I really want to come out of these first 4 picks with at least 2 wide receivers, because you're going to be more than likely starting 4 wide receivers. You're at least going to be starting 3. You don't want to be left behind at wide receiver, especially when those bye weeks hit or if injuries hit. So I definitely, in the 3 wide receiver league, would go more wide receiver heavy in the early rounds. Now, rounds 5 through 10, I'm just going best player available here. And as I've said already, I'm fine just waiting on the quarterbacks in that round 8, round 9 range, like the Bo Nix's, Brock Purdy's, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott. Certainly not going to reach on them. Not going to reach on tight ends. I do want a solid tight end again, like Evan Ingram, David Njoku, those kind of guys. But I'm not going to reach on my tight end. And I will say again, if you're in a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league versus the 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league, you do want to have more wide receivers than running backs when you're done, because again, chances are you're going to be starting more wide receivers than running backs, so you want to have some depth at that position. And then, of course, to finish the draft, we're just going to go best player available. And again, if you're in the 3 wide receiver league, a slight lean towards wide receivers, but you just want depth here on your bench. Now, what if you're in a league with 12 or more teams that start 8? Now we're starting to get to deeper leagues here. Again, this could be what I said before: 1 QB, 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex, or 1 QB, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flexes. There's going to be some differences here. Of course, if you're in the 3 wide receiver league, you got to put more of an emphasis on wide receivers. Again, your flex could be outside the top 100 players, so it's getting more and more important to win the flex position. Now, in this format, I'm 100% punting tight end. I mean, tight end is going to be such a small percentage of your weekly score here that it's really not worth it. I mean, again, if I can get like the Evan Ingrams, the David Njokus, where they're going, yes, I'll take them. But there is no way I'm reaching on tight end, and I'm totally fine punting the position. And again, I'm not going to take an early QB here unless they fall way below ADP, because we're looking at, 12 teams, 14 teamers. If you're in a 16 teamer, like, you really need to have good players at the more important positions. We can find good enough QBs later on. All right, so how do I attack this draft? Well, again, in the early rounds, I'm just going best player available. I am not going to take a quarterback within the first 4 rounds. And if I'm in a 3 wide receiver league, I want minimum 2 wide receivers after the first 4 picks, and I'd be okay with 3 wide receivers. If you're in the 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league, it gives you more flexibility to balance out how you attack these early rounds. But no QB in the first 4 rounds for me. Now, I will say, in round 5, if one of those elite QBs falls to me, which is very unlikely, especially in like if you're in a 14-teamer or a 16-teamer, but if somehow they do, and I'm talking Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, yes, I will take him in round 5 because I feel like the value is too good. But other than that, I'm not going to take a quarterback early. I'm just going to continue to draft best player available. And then around 6 through 10, again, just continue best player available. Again, if you're in a 3 wide receiver league, put a bit more emphasis on drafting wide receivers over running backs. If you're in the 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, you can go either way here. I will start thinking about QB in round 8, round 9, depending on your league size. Again, looking for those Bo Nixes, Brock Purdy's, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott's type. Justin Fields, if he's not injured too badly, doesn't sound like his toe is serious. Those type of quarterbacks. And again, I'm punting tight end here. I'm probably going to wait till the double-digit rounds to take a tight end. Again, unless I can get like an Evan Ingram, David Njoku at their ADP. But I'm fine just waiting and getting like Dalton Kincaid, Dallas Goedert, even like Hunter Henry's, guys like that, because again, it's going to be such a small percentage of your weekly score. All right, now let's get to the leagues where you start 9 or more players, and let's start with 10 teams or fewer. Look, this is not that shallow of a league anymore. We're talking about 1 QB, 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, a tight end, and 2 or more flexes. Like even in a 10-team league, it's going to be a pretty deep league. Maybe in an 8-team league, it's shallow, but again, QB and tight end are going to be such a small percentage of your weekly score in this format. I really don't feel the need to take him early. I mean, tight end especially, full-on punt mode here. But quarterback, same thing, not going to go early at quarterback here. All right, so how do I attack this draft in the early rounds, rounds 1 through 4? Well, I definitely want at least 2 wide receivers out of the first 4 picks, maybe even 3, maybe even 4 in some drafts. I'm okay anchor RB here with 1 running back, of course, but man, you need to start 3 wide receivers and 2 or more flexes. There's a very good chance we're starting 4, 5 wide receivers on given weeks, maybe even more depending on how deep your league is. I don't want to get left behind at wide receiver. Give me the studs. Once again, in round 5, if somehow Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels are still on the board, sure, I'll pull the trigger. But that is it. If not, I'm probably going to take another wide receiver unless I haven't drafted a running back yet. Maybe a running back if the value's there. Mostly best player available with a lean towards wide receiver. Then around 6 to 10, we're going best player available. Again, a lean towards wide receiver because we're going to need to start a lot of them probably. And especially when we have those bye weeks and injuries, we don't want to fall behind at the wide receiver flex position. And again, like I've said in the other ones, I don't know if you've watched it, but around 8, around 9, I'm going to start looking at QB, Brock Purdy, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott, Bo Nix, Justin Fields. It sounds like he averted disaster with the toe. Those guys that give me upside, but I can get them later in the draft. And again, I'm just going to punt tight end here. Probably double-digit round tight end. Again, unless I can get like an Evan Ingram, David Njoku at their ADP, fine. But other than that, I'm probably just going to punt tight end because again, when you're starting 9 players and tight end's only one of them, they're going to be such a small percentage of your weekly total that you're not going to miss it much if your tight ends aren't great. And then, of course, to finish out the draft, we're just going to go best player available, but we want to put a slight lean towards wide receiver because, again, we're probably going to be starting a lot of them. Then finally, we got the big boy league. This is not for the faint of heart. If your league has 12 or more teams and you start 9 or more players, congratulations. You are in probably an expert league and you probably are a fantasy football degenerate, hardcore player because I play in these leagues every single year. They are not easy. The waivers are very, very thin. The bench is crucial. You've got to be active. You've got to be on top of it. And you've got to know your players very deep into the drafts. I mean, you could potentially be looking at like a top 150 player as your flex, depending on how many flexes you have and how many teams are in your league. So here I am almost certainly punting QB and I'm absolutely punting tight end, but probably even QB too, because again, the bench becomes so important, especially during those bye weeks towards the end of the season when injuries hit. And you can't just go out to the waiver wire and find, gems out there because, again, if you're in a 14-team league that starts 10, 11 players, you think there's a lot on the waiver wire? There's not much on the waiver wire here, especially if you're in a sharp league. So we want to really load up on the positions that matter, which is running back and wide receiver, because we're going to be starting a ton of these guys, and quarterback and tight end is going to be such a small percentage of our weekly score. So in rounds 1 through 4, I absolutely, again, want at least 2 wide receivers here, more comfortably 3 wide receivers. And look, this is the type of draft that 0 RB absolutely crushes. So I'm totally fine if you don't even want to take a running back in the first 4 rounds. Rounds 5 through 10, I'm just going to continue to hammer best player available with a lean towards wide receiver because, again, it's hard to find 3 startable running backs in a week, let alone 4 or 5. So chances are you're going to be starting 4 or 5, maybe even 6 wide receivers every single week, depending on your league settings. I'm just going to keep stacking up those wide receivers. I'm not going to ignore running back if the value is there, but I know the importance of wide receiver in these leagues. And again, when I start to get to like round 8, round 9, that's when I'll start to think about the Bo Nixes, the Brock Purdy's, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott, Justin Fields, if he's healthy, which it sounds like he is. Guys with upside that I can get later. But I am absolutely going to punt tight end till the double-digit rounds. And of course, in the double-digit rounds, we're going to keep stacking that bench as best we can because, again, waivers, there's not going to be a lot on the waivers throughout the season. So you need to have a good, deep bench that can carry you through the entire season. I'm fine with whatever tight end, Dalton Kincaid, Dallas Goedert, Hunter Henry. There's a bunch of them in this range. You can always drop them and stream if you have to, because again, tight end is going to be such a small percentage of your weekly score, it almost doesn't matter. Now, I do want to quickly talk about Superflex because I know it is starting to gain in popularity. Let me first say, if you're in a Superflex league, don't feel like you have to get a ton of elite quarterbacks. Yes, if you have a top 4 or 5 pick, absolutely, you're grabbing one of those stud quarterbacks. But don't feel like you have to get a middling quarterback if there are stud wide receivers and running backs still on the board. My general rule is I want 3 quarterbacks that are good starting quarterbacks, meaning I know they're locked in as a starter, they have decent enough upside, and they're in relatively good offenses. Guys like Geno Smith are fine. You know, guys in that range like Michael Penix Jr., Tua, who people hate, is fine in a super flex league. You can always mix and match here and play matchups on a given week. You don't have to start the same 2 guys every week. One guy's got a tough matchup, the other 2 have easy ones. You start them, you bench him. Now, it's also very important that you know your league here, because if you're in a league where people hoard quarterbacks, and quarterbacks are flying off early, you might have to take quarterbacks earlier because you don't want to be in a super flex league where you're starting Daniel Jones and Tyler Shook as your 2 quarterbacks and just getting murdered at the QB position. And then, as I've said, if you've watched any of my the league ones in this video, the more shallow the league is, meaning the less players you start, the more valuable the quarterback and especially the super flex becomes. So the earlier you want to take those quarterbacks. But other than that, pretty much follow the rules I set forth above. Just know that quarterbacks are going to go earlier, and you're going to want to take quarterbacks earlier, and you're going to want to try to have 3 good quarterbacks by the time it's done. And then finally, I want a quick note on PPR versus non-PPR. I know most people play in PPR leagues, either half PPR or full PPR, but in case you don't, this is what I would change. Number 1, running backs become insanely more valuable than wide receivers in this format. Last year, there were 24 running backs that averaged 10 or more points per game in non-PPR. There were only 15 wide receivers, and 10 running backs averaged over 14 points per game. Only 1 wide receiver did that last year. That was Jamar Chase. So running backs absolutely dominate this league. You know who else dominates this league? Quarterbacks, especially those elite ones that can get you 20 plus points most of the weeks. We're talking the Josh Allens, Lamar Jacksons, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurtses, maybe the Joe Burrows. This is definitely a format in non-PPR where I would definitely hit running back early and often in my draft, regardless of league size. I would also be very, very comfortable reaching on one of those elite quarterbacks because having a guy getting you 20 plus points every single week in a non-PPR league is massive because hardly anybody scores 20 points in a non-PPR league. So go quarterback early, go running back early. Wide receiver can kind of be an afterthought, and tight end should be a complete afterthought. I mean, George Kittle was the only tight end to even average over 9 points per game last year in non-PPR. Tight ends are a joke in non-PPR. All right, there you go. That should cover any draft you have this year. Should help you dominate your draft so you know exactly how to draft, but now you got to know who to draft. Don't worry, we've covered that in a bazillion videos this offseason, and we're going to continue to cover it. You can find all the information you need on who to draft in our playlist right here.